Hello, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join me today to talk about one of the most exciting and impactful topics in education today. Now, I might be making that sound a bit dramatic, but by the end of our time together, I hope that you will agree with me that the strategies around self-regulation have enormous potential to shift the way we look at our classrooms and our learning environments. My name is Laura Boone. I'm an IT director and mindfulness specialist, and I have spent the past 15 years in education as first a classroom teacher and then a district-wide technology integration coach and integration specialist, and I am now an IT director and professional learning specialist. So during those 15 years, I have also studied yoga, mindfulness, and meditation, and throughout the years have integrated some of the practices that I've learned into the classroom experience. And the outcomes have been pretty darn cool. So let's dive in and see what you think. We're going to cover quite a bit of territory here, and the cool thing is that you're going to leave with a lot to explore and think about, and we're going to make sure that you have this presentation with all the links to take with you and my contact information in case you want to discuss things further and if you want to share your successes as you move into the new school year. So before we go any further, I would like to ask that you do two things, and you can see the instructions here on the screen. First, I would like you to grab a piece of paper and something to write with. It can be anything. It could be a piece of scratch paper like I've shown on this notepad on the screen here. But ideally, it's something for your notes, like a regular 8.5 by 11 size piece of paper on which you can write. Now, on that piece of paper, I would like you to draw two perpendicular lines so that it forms four quadrants as shown here, and then name them quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the order shown on the page. The second thing that I would like you to do is go to the link that I'm dropping in the chat that is also shown on the screen here. It's a bit.ly, BLS where, and there you're going to see a simple question to answer. I'm going to give us, say, about 2 minutes to get both of those things done. And I'm going to repeat the instructions a couple of times and toggle between a couple of the screens. But know that right now, just get started. Go grab that piece of paper and something to write with. Draw those quadrants. And then once you've done that, go over to the bit.ly to show us where you are learning from today. Again, I'm just going to quietly repeat the instructions in the background. I'm going to leave this screen up for about another second. It's going to show you that we would love if you would grab a piece of paper and draw two perpendicular lines to form four quadrants. The order of the quadrants isn't essential, but that's the direction we're going to flow through. We're going to start at the top left with quadrant 1, the top right, quadrant 2, the bottom left is going to be quadrant 3, and the right is going to be quadrant 4. And then we are also going to ask you to go to the bit.ly, BLS where, and show us where you are learning from today. I'm going to toggle back and forth so that you don't lose that bit.ly. And then once you've done both of those things, come on back and in the chat, if you haven't yet, drop in your name, your school district or school site or your employment location, and what you do, what your role is in supporting students. And I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds to get that piece of paper, to get that bit.ly checked out and posted where you're coming in from today. And then lastly, to drop your name in the chat with your role and your location, where you work, so that we all know who we're working with today. So I'm going to guess that almost everybody has had a chance to get that done, and I'm going to move forward. And I'm going to click on this screen. And the reason I'm doing it, I'm going to scoot right past it, but what I want to do is make sure that by the end of our time together today, if somebody would remind me if I if I forget, and I don't think I will, but I would love somebody to remind me to put the link at the end of our time together for Harvard's Center on the Developing Child. They have an entire section of their site devoted to the study of executive functioning and self-regulation, and there's just so much cool stuff in there that we don't have time to dive into today, but I want to make sure you leave with that resource and that I've highlighted it as a great place to go to learn more. So let's spend the next little bit of our time together calibrating on a definition of self-regulation. Now, because of the less interactive nature of this session, I have taken the liberty of choosing a working definition for us that we can baseline off of. And that definition is shown here as control of oneself exercised independently of supervision or the like. That's the definition of self-regulation from dictionary.com, and it notes that self-regulation was first recorded as in existence back somewhere between 1685 and 1695. And I really like this definition based on several keywords. The first being control, next of self, independent of supervision. Now, this doesn't just apply to kids. This can apply to all of us because think about it. For all of us, there are times that exercising control of ourselves, independent of supervision or the like, is challenging. I believe that we have all, at one time or another, wanted to scoot through a stop sign when nobody else was around, to speed on the highway, perhaps when there wasn't a police officer present. And I know that I have been guilty of wanting to eat that extra cookie when nobody is watching. So we really can't just eyeball the kids when we're discussing self-regulation. We sometimes do need to clean our own houses a little bit first. But for the purposes of our time together today, we are discussing classroom self-regulation. So what I would like you to do next is on that piece of paper where you just made those quadrants, I would like you to take 1 minute to identify ways that you help your students self-regulate. Now, remembering our definition of self-regulation is control of oneself exercised independently of supervision or the like, and it is going to be shown on the screen for most of our time together today for you to refer to. Knowing that's the definition, how do you support your students in their self-regulatory behaviors? And I'm starting a 1 minute timer on my phone. You'll hear it go off when the time is up, and then we will move on to the next part of the conversation. All right. So, hope you got some great ideas and memories and thoughts down on there. And now let's talk about why self-regulation is such a hot topic right now. Well, you might suspect that some of our thoughts on this lie behind the fact that a year or so ago we went from the face-to-face classroom where our kiddos were supported in their self-regulatory efforts by us, right? By teacher assists. We had classroom rules, clip charts, proximity, we had the look. Our kiddos had all sorts of physical reminders every day that they needed to manage their body's emotions, attention, and get their classroom done. And then we sent them all home. Some of them we sent with a laptop, some not. But suddenly our kiddos were responsible for making sure that all the things that we used to guide them through doing each day happened. And we all did our best, right? But without the physical learning environment and tools that we used in the classrooms, the kids did have to do a lot more for themselves. And some of our kiddos did have adults at home, of course. But really, sometimes we can all agree that that almost doubled some of the challenges, right? Because now think about it. We have parents there giving it their all to support. But the parents didn't know the frameworks within which our kids learn. And as parents, we have our own ways of doing things, right? And so we added that into the mix. So, in many ways, our kiddos were left really to figure it out on their own in what was definitely a confusing environment. So, there were challenges, and I'm sure you saw many of them. So, in quadrant 2, take the next minute, setting the timer again, to write down some of the self regulatory challenges that you saw. I'm setting the timer to go now. All right. So we now have quadrants 1 and 2 complete. So I'm guessing if we were all together and we could share our notes, we would see that many of the challenges among our students are in common, right? And that they really show the impact of the lack of support that we as educators wanted to, but were no longer able to provide. After all, when our kids went home, they really did move into a fully tech-dependent learning environment that offered few to none of the external controls we were used to providing. We were all working on the fly. We were sometimes creating learning environments from scratch. And at the same time with that, we were shifting the onus of ownership of managing body, attention, emotions, and getting work done onto our students. And we will all agree that many of our kids did a great job, an amazing job, and many did an okay job. And then some, we can all agree, were not quite as successful. Many of our kids found that loss of external controls to be very challenging. They lost focus, they were a bit off task at times. And when those challenges came up, it was often interesting to see that the tech was blamed. The computers weren't controlled, they weren't managed, they weren't monitored enough, and the call for external controls of devices grew. So I can attest to you, in over a decade of technology and great integration, what tends to happen is as environments become more tech rich, the request for the addition of external controls grow, and those external controls are seen as the solution to the problems happening. And so on my side of the house, it did not come as any surprise to me or anyone else in IT or tech integration during home learning. It didn't come as a surprise that there was an increased number of requests for things like content filters, for controls and ways of limiting what students were able to do on the computer. Teachers were requesting to be able to control the computers of the students. We had a lot more requests from families and educators to remotely block individual games, movies, videos, etc., etc. And that put us in a little bit of a frustrating circular challenge. So think about it. It looks like this, right? Teacher finds a site that is becoming a problem and requests that it be blocked. IT blocks it. Kid finds the next site that they like. Teacher again requests a block. Eventually, IT is going to end up blocking that entire category. Perhaps it's games in your school, it might be videos, it might be YouTube, etc. And then as a teacher, we find the need for a site for an educational game, video, or movie, and we don't have access. So as a teacher, we request that the site be unblocked, right? IT unblocks, but it might not happen in time for the teacher's lesson. It really becomes kind of a tail chasing thing, to be honest. So, as a technology specialist, a classroom teacher, one of my key phrases when focusing on this, when focusing on digital citizenship and online behavior choices with students and teachers, has always been, and I quote, just because you can doesn't mean you should, end quote. So we have all learned and grown so much through this experience. And as we have moved into and are moving back into the classroom, the question is then becoming, do we want the old normal? Do we want to go back to the teacher centric classroom where we rely so heavily on rules and clip charts and proximity, and where many of us ended up very tired by the end of the day? Or do we want to go with keeping the best of both? Should we take what really worked well in each domain, the best of the teacher based classroom, what great stuff can happen with the online resources, and the power and growth that the kids have made, and do a mashup of sorts? We say yes. We believe that we should grab onto the many skills we've learned and empower each individual in the environment to own the regulation of their bodies, attention, emotions, and their output. For students, we're talking about their classwork, right? So how do we do that? Well, we have to rethink a bit how we manage our classroom and schools. We may have to give some focus to helping students own their self-regulation, right? Again, external exercise and control independent of supervision. And many of them are off to such a great start, so let's keep them moving along that path. Let's teach them and remind ourselves that self-regulation begins with managing the human innate stress response. Let's remind ourselves that by managing how we react to stress, we impact our self-regulatory success. Therefore, by decreasing the stress response, we can increase self-regulatory success and allow each of us to own the management of our bodies, emotions, and our attention. So, as the adults in the room, we begin by understanding some of the biology of the stress response. First, we recognize that stress is exacerbated by a feeling of being out of control. So let's spend some time there and think about that. In the context of our students' day, how often do they have control? Picture being a kid and arriving at school. Can you choose when you use the restroom? Can you choose when you sharpen your pencil? And can you always decide when and if you want to drink some water? If you're having a bad day, is there the chance to step away from the rules for a few minutes just to collect your thoughts? The answer is usually no. And let's not forget that it's often the same for the teacher. How often, as a classroom teacher, can we run out of the classroom to run and go potty, refill our coffee, address a personal issue, return a phone call, any of those things that end up needing to happen throughout the day? It's rare. Our work days, our school days are tightly structured, tightly time bound, and we often don't and won't have control over when and how things happen. So, what we ask ourselves then is, where can we be in control? How can we help our bodies turn off the stress response and support the prefrontal cortex in doing its best work of good decision making? And the answer is that it's found in the body, the breath, and the thoughts. Those are the only things that are almost always within our control. Now, this is big. This is a lot. It really seems too easy when I say it, and at the same time, too hard. So think about it. When you get stressed, what goes first? Is it still easy to remember those rules? To listen, to pay attention, to focus? When emotions take over for you, what's the first thing to go? So for me, it is I get foggy. I forget little things that are important, like where I put my keys, where I put my phone, where my pen is. It's all the little things like that. So because I know that about myself, I've learned it through too many experiences. I've also learned to use adaptive behaviors, breath work in my example, to reduce my stress response and bring myself back to rights. Now, today I can do this in a meeting, in a class, I can do it in my car sitting in traffic, I can do it on an airplane, but it was not intuitive. I absolutely had to learn it from somebody. And it had to be taught to me explicitly. And so what's really cool about that though is if we know that as the adults, if we could walk in the shoes of our students and understand where their control does not lie during the day, we can then be that somebody for our students and our colleagues alike and help guide through the experience of teaching people what they can control. And with that being said, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to start showing, and then you are going to get to start doing. So to get started started with the learning, I'm going to take you through an exercise that many of you may have already seen in the past, but you may not have seen it with little guy as a breathing buddy. So I'm going to switch screens here and take us over to meet our little breathing buddy pufferfish. Now, this little pufferfish guy, when I hit play, is going to move up and down on the screen in time with the way we should be inhaling and exhaling. So when I click play here, you'll know that there is sound in the background. You're not going to be able to hear it, but it's bubbles and water and it's kind of cool. So as I click play here, you're going to see that he's going to drop down to the bottom of the ocean floor and get small, representing the exhale, and as he moves up, he gets bigger, representing the inhale. You can see on the right-hand side that you can align when you're supposed to breathe in and when you're supposed to breathe out. So let me move that mouse out of the way. And let's join him in doing some fresh breathing exercises. We're going to inhale through the nose as he rises. So inhale and exhale through the mouth. And let's do it a few more times along with them. Inhaling up. Exhaling through the mouth down. We always inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth. And let's do that one more time. Inhale. And exhale. Letting all that air out. And I'm going to pause him. You're going to still see him on the screen, but what I'd love for you to do now is close your eyes and check in with how you feel. Perhaps you feel slightly more relaxed. Maybe your shoulders dropped away from your ears just the tiniest bit. If not, no worries. You can always come back to the breathing buddy fish later and add in a few more rounds of breath. Now, something kind of cool, if you do this with students, what I've done in the past is I've had them bring in a breathing buddy. So they have perhaps brought in a tiny little car or a stuffed animal or something really small that I know I can hear as a classroom teacher. I'm going, oh my gosh, what a nightmare you'd be creating there. But really, truly, even a little like Lego creature or something, those little breathing buddies give them something to visualize. They can physically, so you don't have to be online, take those breathing buddies and move them up and down in front of their faces as they breathe. And then it becomes almost a trigger to check in with their breath if you let them keep their little breathing buddy just on the side of their desk, or maybe they keep them in their pocket or inside their desk if there's storage space. But that visual reminder will then very quickly become a cue to mind their breath and take time to take a couple deep breaths when they're feeling stressed out. So that's just one of the strategies that I learned that I thought was really cool, really beneficial. And we'll talk a little bit about the eggs later, and then we will also talk about how to implement these strategies in a low stress way. But before we do that, what I'd like to do is ask you to take some time to explore some of the resources that are out there. What we often have happen is we go to a PD, we hear about all these cool things, and we think, even during the time, dang, like I want to do that, but there is no way that I'm going to have time to create all these activities. There's no way I'm going to be able to do all the research I need to be able to do in order to tell my parents why I'm doing all these kind of different new things with their kids. We've all been there, right? So what we've done for you is created a bank of resources, and now we're going to give you a bit of time to check them out. That way, you have some time right now to do some of that research. You can get started. We have tons of information for you. And then when you walk away today, you'll have tools that you can implement right away, low startup, low barrier to entry. And I have intentionally only included resources, well, except for one, that I have found, not resources I've created, because I want us all to see how much great stuff is already out there, and thus how rarely we need to reinvent the wheel. So what I'm going to do is ask you to take the next 10 minutes to check out the resources at this link, the bit.ly that's shown on the screen. I'm going to set a 10-minute timer that's going to run on the screen. And I'm going to toggle back and forth between that timer and this page so that if you lose the bit.ly or haven't had a chance to write it down, it'll be available to you. But at the same time, I'm going to toggle back and forth so you can see how much time we have left. Okay, so feel free to hop over to this bit.ly. It's BLS-selfreg, and take time to click around, look around, see what kind of cool stuff is there and what might be of interest to you. The screen you see is going to look a little bit different than this screenshot, but it's the same idea that there are resources for you to explore. So I'm going to now move us over to our 10-minute timer. I'm going to click to get it started, and please go over to that bit.ly and take the time to explore. It's going to be quiet. I'm not going to put any music or anything like that on, so you're going to hear 10 minutes of silence, but know that we are here, and if you have any questions or anything, drop them in the chat, and we will see you all in just under 10 minutes. And for those of you who are not seeing the screen, we have just under a minute left for individual exploration of resources. Yet no fear, you'll have the link to this document to keep, but take the next 30 seconds or so to start wrapping up what you're doing and rejoin us in the regular meeting. All right, welcome back. And as you are rejoining us, I hope that you are finding something so exciting and intriguing that you don't want to come back. Yeah, I'm hoping that you still do. We have about 5 to 8 minutes left together today, and you can go back to that at any time. And again, I would love for you to email me or touch base with me as you try out some of these resources or as you find more research and exploration so that I can hear about your successes and your movement along the journey. So my question now is, which tools will you try first? So new tools need to be tried out, practiced, and it often takes time to know if they're going to work. And almost everything on there can be used straight out of the box right away, but there's always a fun little learning curve that we have in everything. So in quadrant 3, please do me a favor and identify which tool or tools you will implement first. Think about when you will start. Note how long you will give it before deciding if it works. Remember, things don't always work exactly the way we want them to the first time. We didn't ride a bicycle the first time we tried. And why this one or these ones are your first choice. Please take about 1 minute. I'm going to set our trusty timer again for 1 minute and jot down in quadrant 3 what you are going to do first. Awesome, there's our timer. So now we have filled in quadrants 1, 2, and 3. We have identified challenges. We have identified strategies that we use. We've taken some time to think about which of the strategies that we've explored or resources that we've explored that we're going to try first. And so now let's talk a little bit about mindset and preparing ourselves for integration. Today's and the reality of our future learning environments is that they are going to continue to offer fewer and fewer teacher controls. And we are going to all benefit from the many ways that we can give our students control of learning and offer self-regulatory tools, right? So we might as well dive in and try out some new cool things. And I know many of you already are. So not just taking away from, just distracting from all the cool things that are already happening. It's let's manage our strategies around how to keep our energy going and keep moving forward into the future. So we all want to remember and get comfortable with knowing that it may not go smoothly at first. We may try to do a breathing buddy exercise with our students and it doesn't go swimmingly, get it, breathing buddy with the fish, the first time. And that's okay, right? We dipped our toes in. We want to be comfortable knowing the students may not know how to learn in this environment that we're creating where they have more control over their breath, their bodies, their attention, their focus. It's going to take them time. They will likely need help in learning to persevere through things independently. Trying things out. We always want to make sure that when we try something new out, a self-regulatory technique, that we do it in a low stress environment. And we want to remember that taking away tech is not the answer. Technology is a very natural part of our lives. And as we support our students in integrating self-regulatory behaviors into their daily experience, they will naturally become more self-regulated, when they are on tech as well as when they are not on tech. So anyways, those are just some of the thoughts that I had as we were talking about this in a group, and I wanted to make sure that we shared those thoughts with you today. So we have about another couple minutes, and what I'd love for us to do is to tie it all together. So looking back at the self-regulatory support practices you identified in quadrant 1, the question now becomes who owns the control in those Q1 practices? If the answer is the student, I would consider keeping it. If it is not the student who is in control, if it's the teacher or some external force, should we consider if it still fits the teaching needs and style of the classroom today? Okay, then look at quadrant 2 behaviors. Will the quadrant 3 strategy address or support self-regulation in the areas that you wrote down as your students' areas of challenge? And then in quadrant 4, as our wrap up for today, please write an I will statement that identifies which strategy you will bring to your students first, when you will do this, literally putting it on the calendar, when you will do a self-check, and how you will decide if it is a successful strategy. So what indicators will you be looking for to define, yes, this strategy is one that works and I want to keep it in my tool belt? So I am going to ask you to take 2 minutes to do that, and then we will come back for a final wrap up. I'm setting my timer for 2 minutes this time, and looking at quadrant 4, please create your I will statement. We have about 30 seconds. And 10 more seconds. and time. So what I do know is one of the questions that may have come up and popped into your mind immediately when I said let's calendar this is that school hasn't started and I don't even know yet what I'm going to be doing when. So obviously those calendar dates can shift. But the idea is that when we put pen to paper, when we put things in our calendar, they definitely are more likely to happen. And between this session and the first day of school, there are going to be so many things that happen that you may forget entirely that you even attended this session. So that's where putting something in the calendar would be really great. So we are at our time for today, and I would love for you to let me know how it goes. Please feel free, I would love it, to email me at lboone@edtechminds.com for sharing, for questions, for anything that you've done or that you want to know more about. And I want to say thank you for all of your time today. I hope you have a beautiful rest of the summer and a successful and amazing next year. Take care, everybody. Thanks a lot.